This era saved Cartoon Network. Sort of. Now, if you've been with me up until this point, I think we've seen almost every aspect of what the Cartoon Network eras have had to offer. But if you haven't been with me, let me give you a little recap. We've seen Cartoon Network's humble beginnings with the checkerboard era, where classic cartoons such as Scooby-Doo and the Flintstones were aired. Once the network got established, it looked to put all of the other cartoon channels on notice, with the Powerhouse era, in which original cartoons were made. After that, there was a short transition period with the underrated Starburst era that put all of the homegrown cartoons on primetime. Then we got arguably one of the greatest periods of cartoons ever with CN City. Cartoons old and new, acquired and original lived amongst each other in a utopia. But the funny thing is, if this era was looked at as the Great Gatsby of cartoons, then ironically enough, we would find ourselves in the Great Depression with the Yes and Fall era. Original cartoons such as Dexter's Laboratory, the Powerpuff Girls, and Courage the Cowardly Dog were all seeing their end during these times, which would leave Cartoon Network in a proverbial drought for the time being. But with the era that would come next, that drought would be over. The nudes era, in many people's eyes, is the saving grace for Cartoon Network. The nudes era saved Cartoon Network from what was going to be the point of no return. But the biggest question from that is, why? How did the nudes era save Cartoon Network? What were the shows, blocks, and overall direction like? Well, we're about to find all of that out right now. The nudes era was launched on July 14th, 2008, and is the 8th official era for Cartoon Network. I would love to start off with the obvious elephant in the room, but I want to start off with something that shouldn't go unnoticed because it's important. The biggest note of all was a statement that Cartoon Network would release leading up to the launch of the nudes era. Now I'm going to paraphrase a bit, but the statement goes as follows. Cartoon Network's brand identity is inseparable from the identities of the countless interesting and adorable characters who inhabit the CN airwaves. The characters in themselves are the brand, and their collective power makes Cartoon Network what it is. With this redesign, the CN team wanted to create an undeniably strong connection between the network and its content. The resulting world is a playground of rich colors and unlimited combinations, ownable only by Cartoon Network. Now you may be like, but Murray, what does this all mean? This really all seems like word salad and a whole lot of nothing. This is the type of direction Cartoon Network needed going into their next era. New and fresh cartoons needed to be put at the forefront with a big emphasis on the design of the promotional marketing. With this statement alone, this feels like the most focused Cartoon Network has had since CN City, which is a good sign. In doing so, Cartoon Network would step away from Shiloh Designs and collaborated with Capacity and Kid Robot for the bumpers of this era. Which brings us to the elephant in the room. Majority of the era's bumpers and promotional marketing would feature these white dummy figures known as nudes, which is what the era would be named after. And you can tell that Cartoon Network got their money's worth with these things. They're doing anything and everything in these bumpers, from running, jumping, dancing, playing ice hockey, snowboarding, you name it. Regardless of their colorful and plain designs, these things were full of personality when they were on screen. But the thing that will make the nudes unique would be the look that they take on of numerous Cartoon Network characters. Most of the characters that the nudes would emulate were from shows that were being featured during the era's programming, which you can tell from this photo alone was a lot. And actually, looking back at it now, the nudes remind me of Funko Pops in their appearance, and I just find that a little funny. Which, in actuality, according to the wiki, the nudes design was based on a DIY toy called Money, also made by Kid Robot. The strongest attribute that these bumpers had was its sheer amount of bumper types. So, prepare yourself. You of course had your sign-on bumper for when the Adult Swim hours would end, which I really liked because you see how the nude comes in from the black background. He's just like, yeah, we're just gonna clean all of that and nude the place up. You then had the traditional next bumpers that featured said character from their show in the form of a nude with a close-up shot of them. Their color palette could be seen at the bottom of the screen. I also think it's worth mentioning that the voice announcers for this era featured Greg Sipes, who is the longtime voice of characters like Beast Boy and Michelangelo, and Will Arnett, who played the voice of Batman in the Lego Batman movie. Their voices will be used for the now, next, and later bumpers. During the holiday periods like Halloween, you'd have these bumpers that either featured the nudes in these spooky Halloween costumes or cartoon characters doing Halloween activities. I definitely had no recollection of Cartoon Network bringing back Super Chunk based on the bumpers for it. Very CN City-like with how the nude would cross the woods with certain items from notable Cartoon Network shows seen in the background. Strangely enough, you had this miscellaneous bumper that featured most of the nude-styled cartoon characters, but with no music in the background, which has me to wonder if this was actually aired on TV. But some of my favorite bumpers were from the grocery store ones. These bumpers would show grocery items going down the checkout counter, which would then reveal the cartoon character that was related to that item, whether it be a pile of fruits already bitten into to reveal Chowder, or some empty maple syrup bottles along with some candy to reveal Flapjack and Knuckles. There's not much to it other than I really like the simple but creative style of these bumpers. And just to show you how important of a time this era was made around, Cartoon Network would make bumpers that were made for the inauguration day of former US President Barack Obama. Now, if that doesn't make you feel old, I don't know what will. During these types of bumpers, they'd ask the kids what they'd do if they were US President.
I would lower taxes a little bit.
And to bring it back around, you had the sign-off bumpers that would lead into the Adult Swim block. Don't just take my word for it when I say that Cartoon Network did absolutely everything with the nudes and then some. They weren't bluffing when they said that their world was a playground of rich colors and endless combinations. You absolutely see that play out in just how much variety the bumpers have and the charm that they bring. Although I'm nowhere near finished talking about the bumpers, I highly recommend you check out what's been archived through the years, especially if you grew up watching this era. But with the charm that the bumpers would bring, Cartoon Network would extend that charm into something as simple as the CN logo. I left this part out, but in Cartoon Network's statement it says, "The CN logo is also an extension of this vocabulary, as the colors and patrons of the characters." With some of the bumpers, you had them ending with said characters' color patterns transferring over to the logo itself. Even though this wouldn't create any big changes as far as enhancing the era, as Cartoon Network said, the logo was an extension of how they wanted to express this era. Now, unlike the fall era, the programming for this era had a lot more original shows that premiered more than they had shows that ended. The new original shows would consist of Total Drama Island, The Secret Saturdays, Ben 10, Ultimate Alien, Generator Rex, George of the Jungle, Star Wars The Clone Wars, Batman Brave and the Bold, and one of the all-time greats, Adventure Time. Now, I'm not going to give Adventure Time a proper introduction only because it was not featured as prominently as it would until the next era. Ed, Edd and Eddy, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, My Gym Partner's a Monkey, Transformers Animated, and Ben 10 Alien Force would all air as well, but would see their end to airing new episodes during this era. However, Flapjack and Chowder would still be ongoing during this time. But it's actually sad to know that Ed and Eddy would be the last cartoon to air during this era. I just find it ironic that the nudes era was a new era for Cartoon Network, but it was the end of an era for Cartoon Network's OG shows. Speaking of end of an era, program blocks such as Toonami and Friday Dynamite would be replaced by Har Har Thursdays and the You Are Here block. Har Har Thursdays, formerly known as CN Thursdays and New Thursday Nights, was a program block that featured new episodes of Cartoon Network original series. This block featured shows such as Camp Lazlo, Chowder, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, and George of the Jungle. Being that Har Har is the phonetic word for laughter, Capacity centered the block's bumpers around that. The block's sign-on bumper started with laughter, with a series of colors and quick transitions to colorful nudes that had eyes and mouths that were laughing. While the You Are Here and traditional nudes bumpers maintained a CGI art style, Har Har Thursdays chose the classic 2D style that we were used to seeing. I remember this block for its look and feel, but I remember it more so because of the shout out it would get in an episode of Flapjack.
Buffy certainly knocked him down a size.
Har har thirsty!
As for the You Are Here block, it would feature more action and adventure-based cartoons, such as Star Wars The Clone Wars, The Secret Saturdays, Ben 10 Alien Force, and Batman Brave and the Bold. With the bumpers for the You Are Here block, it favored more of an award show type of look more than it did an action one. Everything from a gold grid, gold bricks, and a golden nude known as King Nude. Alternatively to that, it also had a blue aesthetic that featured a nude that was all black with horns. Not quite sure what the distinction was between the two bumpers outside of their looks. But this is where we'd see unique bumpers that featured Star Wars The Clone Wars characters. Some of my favorite bits about these bumpers were the 8-bit versions of popular Star Wars themes that played throughout the bumpers. Also seeing the nudes wield lightsabers and even some of them turning into a lightsaber themselves were really great visuals to see. Seeing how some of the bumpers played out, it was like watching a mini episode in of itself, and you would almost forget that it was even a bumper in the first place by how well they were made. I just like in how one of the bumpers, Yoda just outright does a fatality to one of the characters.
Finish him. Yoda wins. Flawless victory. Fatality.
Knowing how serious the Clone Wars series took itself, it was funny to see a nude-shaped Skywalker use the Force, or see stormtroopers march in a pack. You could tell that Capacity was excited to have been able to use the Star Wars IP to make these bumpers. In general, all of these bumpers had tremendous variety mixed in with a fair level of quality. But if I did have one critique as a bit of a nitpick, I'd say I would have liked some element of voice acting from certain characters in some of the bumpers. While I do think the bumpers were just fine without them, reminiscent to CN City, seeing what Chowder would have said to Johnny Test or Flapjack interacting with Heather would have been something to see. But I understand if Cartoon Network wanted to cut back the cost of having to pay voice actors for extra lines and fall back into an era being too expensive. But from the fair looks of it, Cartoon Network has stayed true to its statement about keeping cartoons as its main identity, and that's a great thing to see. When I think about the statement that I had shared earlier, I can't help but think about the person in leadership behind this era, because that's ultimately who's calling the shots here. During the nudes era, Stuart Snyder would serve as president for Cartoon Network. Now, if you're unaware as to who Stuart Snyder was, in my last era retrospective, I openly criticized him for his questionable past and lack of business experience. I won't get into all of the details here. Definitely give that video a check out after this one. While I do believe it was warranted, he absolutely stepped up as a leader for this era, to the point where I think he'd even make the former president of Cartoon Network, Jim Sample, smile. With that being said, for the two steps that Cartoon Network would make in leadership and cartoon priority, it would take one huge step back because of a business decision that would make people hate this era. Now, it's no secret that Cartoon Network has explored elements of live action content dating all the way back to its very first era, the checkerboard era. Whether it be in forms of bumpers that featured real life guests in the form of children, celebrities, and even pro wrestlers. During the CN City era, Cartoon Network would then start to feature movies with a mixture of animation and live action elements. In the previous fall era, Cartoon Network not only had a live action band as the poster boys for the era, but also created their first ever original live action series, Out of Jimmy's Head. So now going into the nudes era, Cartoon Network looked to continue to explore other avenues to expand their live action success. And I use that word very loosely. Being that they already explored most of the options available, the next logical step would be to create a program block that was strictly dedicated to live action content. But this wouldn't be any ordinary live action content. This would be live action content that Cartoon Network themselves would create. Hence you get the infamous CN Reel. Cartoon Network believed so heavily in this business decision to the point they wanted to go all into the promotional marketing for it. Due to the nature of live action, they knew they couldn't have a soft voice, gentle personality. They needed someone who embodied the word loud. So Cartoon Network would call upon the services of none other than rock musician Andrew WK. Now with Andrew WK, taking a quick look at him, he is definitely not someone I'd take that listens to lo-fi music or plays Minecraft on creator mode.
1% more moral to stay married to your wife and marry the person you're having an affair with?
Yes.
Being that they found a name and a face, all they needed to do now was launch the block. Live action shows that would air during this era would include The Othersiders, a group of teens who do paranormal investigations around the state of California, Bobby Says, hosted by Bobby J. Thompson himself, who'd commentate on sports clips and internet videos while also giving advice to people in California. Brain Rush, young contestants are asked trivia questions while riding a roller coaster. Survive This, 8 teens use survival skills to complete challenges within a forest. Dude, What Would Happen, hosted by 3 teens that will conduct experiments under the question, what would happen? And Destroy Build Destroy, hosted by Andrew WK himself, in which 2 teams used parts of other objects to build vehicles in order to destroy the other team's creations. Now, as far as the overall look of CN Real, it's pretty night and day compared to what the Nudes era featured. They clearly wanted their live action characters to be the spotlight in the bumpers with no form of animation in sight. In doing so, they had a clear and distinct look for their bumpers. The main bumper type for CN Real were their next bumpers that featured characters from their live action shows in these studio-esque type of sets that featured green screens, studio lights, and props. While the Nudes era bumpers were more simple and normal in pace, CN Reels were snappier and favored more of a time-lapse style and pace. The bumpers would end in red skinny text with said show listed to air next. But honestly, from how I saw it as a kid at the time, from the feel of the bumpers, while it did look futuristic and fancy with the flashy edits, it also felt uncanny with how they were made. The Nudes era's next bumpers had music, voice announcers, and bright colors, while CN Reel's next bumpers had music that either played backwards or switched to random genres of music in rapid succession. There was no voice announcing whatsoever, and with how the bumpers would end with red text in front of a black background, it felt a little eerie. But as much as I love to tell you how much I absolutely hated these shows because of their live action feel, I actually quite enjoyed it as a kid. Out of all the programs, I remember enjoying Dude, What Would Happen and Destroy Build Destroy the most, considering they were the most popular out of the bunch. You gotta think, as a kid, I was watching other networks like Disney, PBS Kids, and Nickelodeon, which already had a mixture of animation and live action programming in their schedules. So when Cartoon Network decided to feature live action more frequently, I was already desensitized to the idea of live action, if that makes sense. I was a kid that just wanted to be entertained at the time, and as long as I got my fair share of cartoons in that, then I was. Just when you think Cartoon Network would be satisfied with only having a live action block that aired at certain times, as I said earlier, they wanted to go all in with live action programming. Not only would Cartoon Network create CN Real, but shortly after, they'd create a whole new era that ran alongside the Nudes era. On November 30th, 2009, Cartoon Network would launch the Let's Go era, also known as the Prefuse era. Cartoon Network went for this punk rock feel for the bumpers, kind of like how the Fall era did with the Hives. But instead of the Hives being used for the music, they decided to get licensed music that was a lot more popular. Hence you get a song like Blitzkrieg Bop, which is what the alternative name of the era, Let's Go, is based off of. Now, as far as the actual look of the era goes, it's actually quite fitting to call it the Percocet. The Prefuse era. Laundry, which was the studio behind the design, really went all in with this digital tear VHS look. On one end, it looks futuristic and a bit trippy with its effects, and on the other, it looks retro with the punk rock lettering. Given the target demographic, it's not by accident that this bumper would feature more of the action and teen-based shows such as Total Drama Island, 16, Star Wars The Clone Wars, and Ben 10 over the other shows that were aired at the time. Along with the cartoons, however, not only featured the CN Real characters, but also live action movies that were sprinkled into the main bumper as well. Outside the main bumper, Cartoon Network aired transitional bumpers that featured the nude figure in what I would say is many different forms of artwork. The nude figure would either be covered in confetti, covered in chia seeds that would grow fully, paint-filled balloons thrown at it, paint pouring over it from the top, or a team of graffiti artists painting nudes on a billboard with a nude figure in front of it. Most of these types of bumpers would end with a message of "Don't move." Interestingly enough, the Let's Go era allegedly had prototype creations of another style of bumper that favored the trippy style of the Prefuse era, but also adopted a crumbled paper look, as if the Let's Go era wasn't trippy enough. While the Nudes era aired during daytime hours, the Let's Go era would air during prime time from 7 to 10 p.m. There's not much else known about the Prefuse era other than what's been documented on the wiki and YouTube. You guys let me know if there's anything I missed. But other than taking you guys on a nostalgia trip and giving a proper retrospective, trust me when I say, I know why you're really here. Despite Cartoon Network's all-in pursuit to promote and commit to CN Real, there was a lot of pushback amongst network executives and critics. The reasons for the pushback are for reasons that you and I both know because it's no secret at all. By pushing fully into live-action programming, Cartoon Network would continue to alienate its core audience. Looking at something as simple as the CN Real logo itself tells you all you need to know about the network's intentions. Cartoons were being put on the back burner, while live action was being put at the forefront, which is bizarre to say considering how much effort, direction, and dedication was put into the Nudes era. The network would justify this business decision in the name of competing with other networks that feature live action programming, such as Nickelodeon and Disney Channel. I, by no stretch of the imagination, am a business expert, but I was always under the impression that in order to compete with other companies in your line of business, you had to do something that they weren't already doing, but better. While Nickelodeon and Disney had their respective cartoons that were doing really well, early on in their inception, they had already established live action as a two-hit combo for their programming. So how could Cartoon Network have stood out amongst network juggernauts that included live action content? Well, the thing is, Cartoon Network would answer that question themselves years before the Nudes era would launch.
Cartoon Network, the best place for cartoons.
All Cartoon Network had to do was commit to the very slogan that they promoted. They had original cartoons, acquired cartoons, animated movies, cartoons for toddlers, cartoons for teens, cartoons for adults, anime, cartoon shorts, you name it. Instead of doing that, Cartoon Network in many ways went for the low-hanging fruit, which ironically enough would be the fruit that nobody would eat. Most of the CN Real programming would prove to be a ratings failure, as none of the featured shows would crack the top 10 for the network. And don't you find it funny and sadly ironic that Cartoon Network would name this block CN Real, despite the fact that there was nothing real or authentic about the shows that were aired? One of the complaints about the block was that the shows were rip-offs of already established live-action shows. Dude, What Would Happen was a rip-off of Mythbusters. Survive This was oddly similar to Survivor, and Bobby Says was an uninspired imitation of Tosh.0. You would think because of the overwhelming poor reception that CN Real received that Cartoon Network would cancel the operation and deem it a failure. But instead of admitting defeat, Cartoon Network would move CN Real's programming hours from Saturday to Wednesdays, with Dude What Would Happen and Destroyed Build Destroy remaining as the only live action shows to still air at the time. Now, as far as Andrew WK goes, I'm not sure how you guys felt about him being a part of the live action blunder that was CN Real. Some of you may have seen him as entertaining because of his prior work. Maybe you saw him as extremely obnoxious because of his loud persona. Or maybe you saw him as a sellout because of his participation in the block. How I see it though is him being a unique and out there individual that Cartoon Network saw that fit what they were looking for at the time. To branch out of music and step into a project that was different, but at the same time fit his persona was something he could not pass up, I think. He strikes me as a person that saw Cartoon Network's invitation and really wanted to do right from what he was given. I'm not only saying that because of how energetic he came off in the bumpers and in the show, but a few years ago he released a single named Babylon. In the music video, you see quick flashes of a Cartoon Network inspired logo as well as Destroy Build Destroy. To me, you wouldn't be doing that unless you had some type of respect for where you were and what you did. But regardless of what I think, that would not change the events that would soon come for not only the eras, but for the block itself. On May 28th, 2010, the Nudes and Prefuse era would be defunct, with the CN Real block following along with it. Cartoon Network, in the aspect of live action, would finally admit defeat on this day. So with everything that was covered thus far, we now move on to the million-dollar question. How did the Nudes era save Cartoon Network? Well, this felt like a fresh new start for Cartoon Network in so many ways. Cartoon Network prepping the era with an opening statement letting people know what their intentions were was a great way to establish a sense of direction and excitement with the fans. Not only that, but from how I see it, Cartoon Network took something that made its previous eras great and incorporated it into this era. The plain white background is nothing new considering the Starburst era used it first, but it allowed for the characters on screen to have more of a presence. The usage of multiple colors could have been taken from the Yes era, despite how uninspiring that was. The way different characters would randomly interact with each other in each bumper reminded me of the chemistry that characters had in CN City. Even something as small as using the color bar from Har Har Thursday's block would be used as a major asset in the promotional marketing for the era. Obviously, having a big emphasis on original cartoons would be a plus as well. The Nudes era is the epitome of what taking constructive criticism looks like. It was a love letter to the fans that wanted the network to return back to the place it once was, which I'll reiterate again.
Cartoon Network, the best place for cartoons.
As for why people hate this era, I think it's for reasons that have nothing to do with the Nudes era specifically. The Prefuse era, along with CN Real, was strictly a business decision, a corporate ploy to match the competition of other networks. Ironically enough, instead of beating the competition, Cartoon Network would create more competition within itself, and as a result, imploded. With the high praise that I gave Stuart Snyder with the Nudes era, CN Real almost completely washes away any praise that he may have gotten. But the key word in that is almost. The Nudes era, at its core, truly did save the network from disaster. While I do believe the Fall era killed Cartoon Network's credibility, the love and dedication that was put into the Nudes era salvaged a bit of that credibility. Despite Cartoon Network's many setbacks and questionable business decisions, I don't think it's enough to say that the Nudes era failed to save the network. And that's not just coming from me. Many of you guys feel the same way also. A lot of you looked at this era in the same way I did when I was a kid and still do now as an adult. The Nudes era was a breath of fresh air that was much needed for Cartoon Network, and because of that, it gets a +1 for me in the overall era record. As Cartoon Network would progress through the Nudes era and move more into the modern era of cartoons in the Check It era, would it be able to capitalize on the overall success of the Nudes era and leave live action in the past?